Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carter. I love talking about movies, music, comics, and games. And this whole week I've been doing, some quick reviews on the Ant-Man movies, and I just barely got out of seeing Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Can't wait to talk about it. So, let's get right into it. So, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is the third movie in the Ant-Man franchise. Coming after the first Ant-Man and then Ant-Man and the Wasp, it is once again directed by Peyton Reed, and of course stars Paul Rudd, Evangeline Lilly, Michael Douglas, Michelle Pfeiffer, and also brings in Kathryn Newton as Cassie, and of course we have Jonathan Majors playing Kang. And this movie features Ant-Man and the rest of the Ant family, I guess you can call them, being sucked into the quantum realm and discovering that Kang the Conqueror is there and he can't wait to get out. So I'm actually really excited to talk about this movie. And a disclosure before I do, I'm a huge comic book fan, a huge Marvel fan. I've been watching their movies ever since, the first Iron Man came out in the theaters. I went and saw it with my dad opening night, and I've been there opening night for every Marvel movie since. I've read a ton of comics about Marvel. You can see them. I'm putting some up there, just some covers that I enjoy, some comics that are important to me, and I ran out, of course. I didn't plan ahead. And I also have a bookshelf back there with tons of Marvel and DC comics. And those aren't all the ones I've read, of course. I've tried to kind of diversify myself, trying to read up on Kang, find out more about him, because there's so much to know about him and his variants and everything to do with that, and it's all really fascinating to me. I think Kang is actually one of the most interesting villains that Marvel has to offer. And with the right writing team, the right actor and director, I believe that they can make him just as good, if not better, than Thanos. I think that they're doing a good job so far of showing what makes Kang unique and what separates him from, the original big bad of the MCU being Thanos. Instead of collecting these Infinity Stones, there's just so many Kang and Kang variants that it makes him seem unstoppable in a different way from Thanos, and also makes him just as interesting to me as a viewer. Okay, so starting out with the positives, the biggest positive I can give this movie is Kang. Everything about Kang is done perfectly. Before the movie came out, I was a little worried just because some of Phase 4's quality hasn't been the best, especially with some of the movies, such as Black Widow, Thor: Love and Thunder, and Eternals. To like a lesser extent, those three are kind of like the weaker links, considered to be not some of the best ones in the franchise. And also the Disney Plus TV shows often come off as unfocused or rushed or not enough story put in them. And so I wasn't nervous because I really enjoy the first Ant-Man movie and I like the second one, and the creative team behind it I think is strong. But I just needed them to get Kang right. It was the one thing that they needed to do in this movie, was get Kang right. Ever since they announced him being the big bad in this movie and then also in the MCU moving forward, they needed to get him right to show how unique he can be and to show what he brings to the table apart from Thanos. And I'm very happy to say that they did that. 100% they did that. Kang is exceptional in this movie. I absolutely loved everything about him. I was just enthralled every time he was on screen. Jonathan Majors just gives an amazing performance in every scene. You can see just the pain that he's in and being in the quantum realm, how much he wants to get home. And then as the movie progresses, you can see how angry he is and how ruthless and how vengeful he can be. And oftentimes he comes off as terrifying, especially in the third act. As soon as he gets introduced, he's trying to bargain with Scott, and there's a nice scene where it's in the trailer where he's like, "Oh, have I killed you before? You're an Avenger." And every time he brings up, how many Avengers he's killed, it's multiple lines in the movie that he talks about that. I was like, this is perfect. Like, this is Kang. This is awesome. It's so cool because they're doing something very different from Thanos, and I think it's going to work out wonderfully. And I think Jonathan Majors was the perfect pick for the role. I really, really think he gives one of the best performances, if not the best performance, in this movie. I think the only contender would be Paul Rudd. Something else that I liked about this movie was it gives Paul Rudd more to do dramatically. You see Cassie is all grown up now and she's getting into trouble, and you see that Scott Lang doesn't want Cassie to kind of get into the same trap he did, but he's also torn because she looks up to him and sees him as a role model. And so he sees that she's trying to do good, but also sees that she's kind of doing it in the wrong way, getting, arrested and everything, and he's worried about her. And so there's a lot coming in from Scott's perspective about that I really enjoyed. I didn't expect it, and I thought that brought a great amount of, interest into the movie, and also put focus on their relationship and that strain. And then as the movie progresses, they're in the quantum realm and Kang is attacking, and Scott cares about protecting Cassie. and trying not to give anything away with the plot. But of course, he makes the deal with Kang, and I think that everything with that made sense. Scott was willing to go to certain lengths to make a deal with Kang, like he says in the trailer, because he wants to protect Cassie and keep her safe. There's an awesome scene, that scene where Kang is introduced that I just talked about. I think that scene is incredible. Shows Kang how ruthless he is and how far he's willing to go to get what he wants. And Paul Rudd does a really good job of dropping the funny guy, I don't care act, and being just straight serious to the point, and even showing some anger in there, which I thought was awesome. I like Paul Rudd a lot as an actor. He's very, very likable. And I was glad that, the script and the director decided to give him something a little different in this movie. I definitely think that that was a good idea, and it sets it apart from the other Ant-Man movies. Another plus here would be kind of the decisions that some characters make. And I'm going to be as vague as I can in this review. Another plus for me is going to be the acting. I think the performances all around were great. Like I said, Jonathan Majors as Kang, Paul Rudd as Scott, but also Michelle Pfeiffer as Janet. She does a great job as a character that could easily be very frustrating, as the whole movie she's keeping secrets from everybody, trying not to talk too much about Kang, and obviously you can go find, plot holes in other movies where they're going back to the quantum realm, but Kang is there. They do their best to explain it in this movie, but I think people are so used to the MCU explaining everything that they can just accept that, yeah, they didn't think of that idea yet, and they tried to explain it. It doesn't break the universe. It doesn't break the movie. It's fine. You're going to live. And I think that she does a good job, especially in the scenes between her and Kang. You can sense the, in her scenes with Kang, it's so well done. You can sense like the betrayal of trust and the anger, the hatred there. I thought that was great. Another plus would be the humor. A lot of it was toned down quite a bit. There are a few moments where it's like, overtly comedy, especially with some of the freedom fighters in the quantum realm, which I'll talk about later. But for the most part, the comedy I think was very solid. It was well placed. Of course, I'll talk about later. There's always going to be jokes in Marvel movies that just come at the absolute worst times, undercut emotion. But I think that this movie overall balanced humor pretty well. And my last positive is going to be, setting up what comes next. And I hate to do that, because this movie is supposed to close out a trilogy. It kind of begs the question of, is this the ending of a trilogy or the start of Kang Dynasty? And it's a bit of both. It's the ending of a trilogy, and it kind of closes out a little bit of Scott's arc. Not in the best way possible. It doesn't do it as well as Iron Man 3, as much as it pains me to say that because that gets retconned, or as well as Civil War or Ragnarok until Love and Thunder, or even Endgame. I don't think it, story and thematically wise, it closes off as well as it could. As far as setting up what's next, what's to come, I think this movie does a good job. There are a few missteps here and there, but I think this movie is a great introduction to Kang, a great introduction of the MCU to come, and also does a wonderful job of refocusing the Marvel movies, because a lot of people's complaints with Phase 4 was that it was unfocused, and I'm not sure if I would agree with that. I think it has a little bit more to do with just them trying to do too much, too little, and throwing everything at the wall. I don't need a focus in phases or in Marvel. There's not a lot of focus in comic books sometimes, building to their own respective stories, and then a writer will come along and be like, oh, we can do Infinity Gauntlet, let's just do that on the side, or we can do House of M, we'll build up to it, but this Iron Man comic doesn't have much to do with it, or Moon Knight probably doesn't have much to do with it, we can just do that on the side because it's for everyone. But I think that this will settle a lot of people who are complaining online or in person. I think this will do a great job of kind of ending that qualm for a lot of people, and just kind of, yes, they have a plan, they're building towards something, and it's not just all unfocused. And I think that this will probably win a few people back. But will it win everybody back? Is it a home run for Marvel? Let's talk about it. So kind of a disclaimer before I get into the mixed and negative aspects of the video. There's been a lot of negativity online concerning this movie. I don't think it's as bad as people are making it out to be. It's definitely not a 10 out of 10 MCU movie, but it's not a 0 out of 10, not even a 4 out of 10. I'd say it's miles better than Love and Thunder. I enjoyed it far more than I enjoyed Black Widow. I think both of those movies are lesser movies, and just not very well made. And I think Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is better than Eternals, better than a lot of Phase 4, maybe even, early Phase 1 and 2. better than Dark World, Incredible Hulk, and I could keep naming movies, but you get the gist. It's a good movie. I don't think it's as bad as people are making it out to be. If you're a Marvel fan, you'll probably enjoy this movie. I know I definitely did, and I've been let down by Black Widow and Love and Thunder. I don't hate any of the Marvel movies, but I definitely think some are a lot weaker than others. This is not one of them. This is better than Ant-Man and the Wasp, I'd say. It might be almost as good as Ant-Man. I'd say story and thematically wise, Ant-Man wins. However, I found myself enjoying this movie more. It's not a lighthearted comedy like Ant-Man was. It's more of a, Civil War-esque event movie, setting up things to come while also pitting heroes against a big threat. And I thought it was very interesting. And I hate being that guy that's like, oh, it sets up things to come, because movies should, if they do that, great. But movies should focus on the story at hand, focus on resolving the threads. And I think Ant-Man doesn't do that very well. So my mixed aspect of the movie, my biggest one, will be that it just doesn't feel like the ending of a trilogy. It feels like a stepping stone to something bigger, which is great because that's a complaint a lot of people have had with MCU. They're not building towards something, but also sucks because it would have been nice to see Scott's arc come to a close. Not by him dying, but it just would have been nice to see him taking on a little more responsibility, which he does do in this movie. I think there's a great, moment of that in the end. But I think that, of course, it gets tossed away for a joke. As much as I love the MCU, there's no denying that it's been different ever since Endgame. Whether that's COVID, whether that is just, they peaked, such a stupid excuse. They need to restart, they need to end. It can go on forever. Marvel is never going to leave. The MCU is going to be around forever in one way, shape, or form. But it just comes to a point where they need to focus on telling the stories. And I think that they might have lost sight of that here, but it doesn't come off as bad as you think it would. I know the Ant-Man movies, probably the trilogy that no one really talks about. No one is like, I can't wait to see how the Ant-Man trilogy comes to an end. I wonder how they're going to close his arc. They're fun movies. They're fun palate cleansers. And so it will probably be, it's jarring. I've seen Ant-Man and Ant-Man and the Wasp. I watched them both in the last 2 days. Coming from those to just this massive event movie with Kang as the big bad, and it's a lot more serious. There's a lot more people dying and people at risk. Is a bit of a jarring change, but I thought it was a good one. I really enjoyed it. I love the Ant-Man movies. I think they're great. However, this one feels different, and that's a good thing. It's no secret that Ant-Man and the Wasp was pretty criticized. I don't think that movie has a ton of fans. I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's as good as Ant-Man 1. I think it's mid to lower tier of the MCU, and I think this is a step up from that, if I'm being totally honest. Yeah, we lose a lot of the human elements in Scott's life. We lose his ex-wife and her fiance. We lose all of his ex-convict friends, and we kind of cut down to just the Ant family. And then we introduce a ton of new characters like Kang and then the Freedom Fighters. Some of them work, some of them don't. But that's a risk that they took with this movie, and I appreciate it. They didn't play the safe Ant-Man route and fall into that kind of cookie-cutter thing. They decided to take a risk and pit Ant-Man against the new big bad for the Marvel Universe. And I think it worked, but also it had its faults. Feels more like an Avengers 4.5. Feels more like a smaller team-up movie, like an event movie. And that's not a bad thing, in my mind. Some people will not like it. Some people will. That's why I put it in the mixed. And then my final mixed aspect is going to be MODOK. He's in the trailer, so I don't consider it too big of a spoiler, but if you would like, skip ahead to the negatives section. I'll only be talking about this for a minute. But MODOK in the movie is pretty comic accurate. If you've ever seen a comic show or anything with MODOK in it, you know that they do not take him seriously. He's mostly meant to be a big joke. Everyone makes fun of him for how grotesque he looks, and that's no different here. Everyone makes fun of what he looks like. Everyone makes fun of how he is in this movie, and it's decently funny. He does look horrendous. He looks horrifying to look at. I don't know if they did it on purpose or if they're just like, yeah, just throw him in a little screen compressor, but it just looks very unnatural. And so a lot of people were laughing in every scene that he's in, regardless of whether or not it was serious or supposed to be emotional. And I think that they did good with what they could do. He's very accurate to comics. He's very comic book accurate, but not everything looks good or not everything translates well to screen. And I don't know how to feel about this. My gut is dude, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen. Make fun of it. But at the same time, I'm a comic fan, and I enjoy that they did that. I enjoy that they brought his goofiness and his likeness to the movie, regardless of what he looks like. It's hard. It's hard to talk about. Most people are gonna hate him. I feel like most people are gonna be like, that was the stupidest thing ever. It was goofy. That will probably be most people's biggest flaw with the movie. For people that know MODOK and appreciate him, I can see people really liking him. Getting into the negatives, I have a few that I'm just gonna quickly talk about, such as the effects, the pacing, and maybe a few choices in the last 20 minutes that kind of bothered me. And I'll get to the big thing at the end, which is the tone. But starting out with the effects, they're not as good as the first two Ant-Man movies, especially the first one. The first one had incredible effects when it came to the shrinking and how everything looks down, like when you're an inch tall. I think they did a wonderful job with that. This one, they don't balance it as well as they could have. The VFX artists obviously rushed. It's no secret that they are. But you can see that it's just not as good. The volume looks really great, but you can tell something's off. It's probably with the lighting and the blocking and the set when it comes to that. And so it can be a little weird to look at sometimes. Overall, it's a very, visually well done movie. The quantum realm looks very cool. Everything is very creative. There's a ton of like weird creatures there, but it just looks off. Something is wrong with it, and you can tell the whole movie that you're like, oh, something's off. You kind of get used to it after a minute, but it definitely takes some getting used to, and it's not the most beautiful effects to look at. Something that bothered me, considering how good the other Ant-Man movies are with effects and how the shrinking animations look, the growing animations, and how like well the physics are. You can tell in this movie they're a little bit too light, like jumping around after they jump up. They're like springy. It just looks weird. And then my next negative is going to be some of the pacing isn't very good. There's a lot of stuff after they get to the quantum realm with freedom fighters in the quantum realm, just like the characters they meet, and they're like, oh, look at this zany new character. And it's not that funny to me. It wasn't really that interesting. The movie is building up to Kang, and it's very obvious. Building up to that big bad, and they try and facilitate, like the freedom fighters being terrified of him, which I think works, but the freedom fighters just aren't interesting. They aren't very funny, and they just feel like they're in a different movie. They feel like they're in a more like comedically charged movie, like, oh, King is murdering us by the millions, but how many holes do you have? And it can be fun. Like, I laughed. I'm like, that's a weird thing to say, but like, looking back on it, it's like, I don't care. I mean, it didn't make me laugh that much. It wasn't the funniest joke in the movie, and just didn't feel very organic. It was probably the main issue I had with that movie was just the tone. Again, the same thing as the other Ant-Man movies have and most Marvel movies have. This cannot balance the humor and emotion that well. There's a big tragic scene. I hesitate to say tragic. There's a big scene where Kang is just wiping out people. Like, he is going and just murdering people, like dozens, hundreds of people. And then the next we get a funny little MODOK joke. And the joke wasn't funny, and it completely undercuts important moments. And I genuinely was irked. I was bothered by it. I was like, this could have been... I think it took it down like half a point for me. I was just bothered. I understand that, some characters in these movies are meant to be funny, goofy characters. Not every character needs to be serious at all times, but I would have appreciated a little bit more seriousness in that scene, in that moment. I think it could have used it, could have really benefited from it. Again, it's hard to talk about. I'll probably do a spoiler review because it's just so hard to talk about, but I'll figure it out eventually. I just feel like this could have balanced humor and emotion a lot better. And then finally, there were a few choices in the third act, a few decisions that I think people will get bothered by. A few plot convenience choices. They have to have Hank do something because he's the original Ant-Man. I liked what they did with him. I enjoyed it. I thought it was funny. I was like, hey, it's an Ant-Man movie. I'm laughing at this. If this happened in an Avengers movie, I would be pissed. But it's an Ant-Man movie. It's different. They have a different tone about them when it's balanced correctly. That is. But I think it worked. I thought it was funny. I can see a lot of people being bothered by it when you talk about this movie online or in the comments. People will say, oh, but this happened and that's so ridiculous. Just, classic Marvel. How is this supposed to happen in the future? Again, I'm trying to be vague as possible, but... And the last thing in the movie is a character reflecting, and it goes from funny to dramatic to funny. And I think they could have ended with dramatic. I'm fine with a little bit of humor here and there, but the character reflecting has been through a lot in the movie, and they should have reflected a little bit more. They should have been like, oh my gosh, like this action that I took might have caused these massive stakes. There's so many things at play, like, I should take this seriously, and then they just brush it off, which bothered me a lot. But then the post-credit scenes are great and kind of set you back into that, okay, no, there are big consequences to what happened in this movie, because sometimes the movie can feel inconsequential. But overall, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, I really had fun with it. As a comic fan, I enjoyed it a ton. A lot of great comic book stuff in there. Kang is an amazing addition to the MCU. We've seen him before once, but I'm excited to see where we go from here. I can't wait to see him in Kang Dynasty and hopefully Secret Wars. They struck gold with Jonathan Majors. He knocks it out of the park. However, this movie is not without its issues with tone and a few characters here and there kind of bothering me. Overall, I'd give this movie 7.5 out of, or an 8 out of 10. A pretty high score for most people, I know, but yeah, I'm a softie for the Ant-Man movies. I really enjoy them. But yeah, that's my review for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Have you seen it? What did you think? Let me know down below. And are you excited for Kang coming? I'm going to have a spoiler review of this too soon, guys, because there's just so much in this movie that I'd like to talk about but can't. In the meantime, feel free to like and subscribe, comment down below, and I'll see you later.